Monday, and that so happens to be the day that I like to talk about monsters. Hello, everybody. I am Jeff Arbuckle, and this is Monster Mondays, presented to you by Film Seizure. This week, what happens when you take nature and mix it with the industrial complex? Well, you get 1978's Piranha, directed by Joe Dante. Now, Joe Dante should be somebody that a lot of people of a certain age will have a great deal of appreciation for. Not long after this movie, he would end up doing one of the better werewolf movies of the modern era with The Howling. And then he did what I consider to be my favorite Christmas movie in 1984, and that's Gremlins. And then he also did a couple of other decently well-liked movies of the 80s, Inner Space and The Burbs. And of course, in 1990, he then made Gremlins 2, which was partially making fun of his own successful Gremlins movie. In 1993, he made Matinee with John Goodman, where the whole premise of that was a kind of low-budget B-movie filmmaker wanting to make a movie about giant ants or giant manises, one or the other. I think the movie he's trying to make in that is called Mant. M-A-N-T with an exclamation point. And it serves him well because he was one of the Roger Corman filmmakers. He got his start with Corman. One of the first movies he did was Hollywood Boulevard, which was one of those kind of movies that Roger Corman would often seem to challenge his filmmakers to do. In the case of Hollywood Boulevard, which is something I've covered at B-Movie Enema, it's basically, hey, can you make a movie for a real low budget over the course of a very, very short time? And Joe Dante, along with another director, but they basically said, yeah, you know what? We can do that. And they ended up using a bunch of clips from Roger Corman's other movies to help kind of fill out the movie. And it's a really fun kind of a satire, if you will, on the exploitation and the B movies of the 70s. But Piranha is really kind of comes at a time when everybody was riding the coattails of Jaws. Of course, Jaws was one of the biggest movies of all time. It's the literal beginning of what we know as the blockbuster. Movies were popular before Jaws, but movies weren't quite as popular as Jaws was. It changed everything from how movies were distributed, how movies were released on a schedule. I mean, it created what we know of as the summer movie phenomenon, if you will, where movies are particularly held over for a particular time of year. Summer being the big one. The number two big time of the year would be basically the Thanksgiving to the end of the year time frame. But Jaws was a big part of all of that. And while this movie didn't receive particularly great reviews, Steven Spielberg did say that he felt that this was the best of the movies that were kind of cashing in on Jaws. And as I said, was kind of received mixed reviews. However, it later achieved cult status, as a lot of Roger Corman movies do. And it was a gigantic success at the box office. It was made somewhere around a $700,000 budget, ended up making $16 million. It was released towards the end of the summer in 1978. At the beginning of August of that year. And, it took advantage of it being a kind of a summer movie, kind of like Jaws. And we'll talk a little bit more about those comparisons as I kind of go through this movie. Interestingly enough, one of the reviews I definitely want to talk about is Roger Ebert's review. He didn't care much for the special effects, which I do have some stuff to say about that too. But this is something he has constantly talked about, and I know I've seen some of his later reviews saying basically the same thing, but he brought up one of the favorite things that he likes to do in these types of movies, which is talk about the odd compulsion that the characters would have to jump into the water the very moment they discover that it's that is infested by the piranha. And it is something that is, I think, kind of a common trope in a lot of movies that don't know exactly how to push the story forward. Let's face it, if people don't get into this river to be attacked by piranha, the movie doesn't go very far. And so it is funny because I know Roger Ebert's talked about this before. It's like whenever they know that there's a problem over there, people have a compulsion to go over there straight into the problem. And it's just kind of one of those funny things. This movie was popular enough to, of course, have a sequel, which was Piranha 2: The Spawning, which is probably most notable for being a James Cameron movie right before James Cameron would just blast off with the Terminator and then Aliens. But James Cameron kind of came from that same school that Joe Dante did. In fact, Jonathan Demme, Oscar winner for the Silence of the Lambs, came from the Roger Corman stable. So, just because you hear that Roger Corman did something, just because you know that Roger Corman's extremely efficient with a budget and with time tables and stuff like that, that doesn't necessarily mean that they're bad movies that are made. He actually kind of groomed a lot of fantastic directors that would come along a little bit later in the 70s and the 80s. So that sequel was made. Then there was a remake made in 1995. And then, of course, the more recent 2010 and 2012 Piranha movies that came along that really kind of, I think, play up a little bit of the camp factor that this movie also plays up a little bit. But it's a popular movie. It was, certainly it was part of a pedigree of those Jaws ripoffs. Some of them are remembered, some of them aren't. Some people remember Orca, some people remember Barracuda, but Piranha was the one that is a little bit sexier to people, because I think the idea of these ravenous, hungry fish that just live in the rivers of South America, it's a fascinating topic. In fact, I used to sell fish at PetSmart when I was a teenager. And, it's like you see, especially if you deal in like freshwater fish, you see South African cichlids, and they are kind of ornery, and some of them did have what appeared to be kind of teeth. Now, not quite like piranha, but some of them look like piranha and have teeth like piranha, and they're not friendly fish. So, I understand the appeal of piranha and the idea that you could be going for a nice little swim in a nice, pleasant river, and all of a sudden you are being basically eaten to the bone by these little scary, like fish that almost act like a dog biting the bottom of your pant leg or something, just going to town on you. All right, so let's talk about the movie here. Like all good 70s movies, we have an abandoned installation that we find out is a military installation. Remember, this is not too far after the conclusion of the Vietnam War. And, these movies, there was a certain attitude in movies when it came to dealing with the military and those post-war feelings. If you really want to understand how the world was and how the later part of the 70s and going into the 80s really changed, you don't have to look too far than some of the documentaries that were made, particularly about the first Star Wars movie, and about how that really changed public opinion as far as, going from these kind of doldrums to this really kind of weird feeling that people had after Vietnam to going into this new brightened future. Well, this movie kind of plays off of that a little bit. We have these two teenagers who sneak into this installation. They see this, what appears to be a pool, and they're going to bathe in it so that they can go to bed, and when they camp out, they can go to bed clean and refreshed, and they get, of course, attacked by something unseen. But the movie's called Piranha, so we know what attacks them. So, spoiler alert, it's piranhas in that pool there. So we then meet Maggie, who is played by Heather Menzies, who was the wife of Robert Ulrich. She just recently passed away over the last few years or so. But she had been in lots of TV shows, but she was also in The Sound of Music as one of the kids in that. But she is what's called a skip tracer, and she's been hired to essentially find the two teenagers that have gone missing now for some time. So she goes out to and starts to basically track these people down. She ends up hiring or working with this guy that is named Grogan, who is played by Bradford Dillman. She needs him as a guide, and Grogan's kind of got this reputation around this area, and he's kind of this mountain man who kind of lives out by himself, but he has this reputation of being a drunkard, which plays throughout this movie as he's trying to warn people about the dangers. So they go to the installation, and they end up finding the girls' clothes outside, and then they go inside the installation where they see all of these strange little creations. They look like little fish monsters, and there's actually a couple of them that are roaming about on hind legs. They're like half fish, half, I don't know, dinosaur or something. And they end up coming across a guy who is named Dr. Hoke, who is played by Kevin McCarthy. And Kevin McCarthy's always that really good, disheveled, kind of rankled, kind of crazy guy. And he explains that, this used to be a fish hatchery, and it ended up being taken over by the military, and he worked on a project called Operation Razortooth, and is basically what the whole operation was to try to figure out a way to genetically create a form of killer fish that they could use in North Vietnam to basically destroy the rivers and the tributaries up there as kind of a final solution to force the North Vietnamese into surrender. And but the problem was that before they could really do anything that could be released, the war was ended. And but the problem was that they tried to kill all these fish with poison, and there was a very fast evolution that took place in one of the strains of the creatures that they created that was resistant to the poison, and they were able to stay alive by feeding off their own dead. And that was what was in that pool, and he basically watches over it to ensure that these piranha don't get out. Well, the problem is that Maggie drained the pool in hopes of finding the bodies of the two teens that she was sent out to look for, not realizing that she had sent basically the piranhas into the freshwater river. And the other thing about these piranhas is that they have been bred to live in both salt and fresh water. So it's kind of a real problem for these people to deal with. So when as they kind of are trying to figure out what to do about these piranha, of course the piranha begin attacking people along this river, and when Hope tries to help a little boy whose dad has been killed by the piranha, he ends up getting attacked and getting eaten, and he dies before he can explain what they can do to get rid of the piranha. So Grogan and Maggie end up having to call in the military, and it's led by the original head of the project, which is a colonel by the name of Colonel Waxman, and he has some, this is really, I don't think very well explained in this movie, but he has some business relationship with a character that Dick Miller plays. Dick Miller, of course, being in all of these old Roger Corman movies. But Dick Miller runs this resort, this water park in one of the tributaries of this river, and the Colonel has some sort of connection to that, but we don't exactly know what that is. I don't think it's very well explained, but he is with Dr. Mingers. Dr. Mingers is played by Barbara Steele, who is a fantastic like first lady of horror from the 60s. She had been in a couple of Mario Bava movies, and just it was she's just a recognizable face and one of the most beautiful women of horror from the 60s, and she still looks pretty in the late 70s, I might add. But she is there, and she kind of explains that she was kind of part of this original project, and they're going to try to poison these fish again. And they don't really want to listen to anything that Grogan or Maggie has to say. So they're kind of left to their own devices to try to save two things on this river. First, this kid's summer camp that Paul Grogan's daughter is at, and also Dick Miller's resort and water park, because the fish are traveling in the water. I mean, these things are on the water. They will eventually get there, and sure enough, it gets to the kids' camp, where it starts attacking the kids. It attacks some of the counselors, and it becomes particularly scary at that point, because you're watching these kids essentially being attacked by these fish. Well, enough of the kids are able to kind of survive those attacks that then Grogan and Maggie have to go to the resort, and that's where the real bloodbath happens. So Paul decides, well, I have to find this smelting plant that used to be on the river and try to open up the waste. I don't know what it was called, but like basically where all of the toxic waste from all of the smelting was stored. If I can open up that chamber, hopefully the toxic waste can kill the fish. Finds out that it's all underwater, so he and Maggie have to figure out and devise a way to get underwater and take care of that before the piranha come. And he's attacked by the piranha, but Maggie's able to he's able to open up the valve that releases all of the toxic waste that seemingly kills the piranha, and Maggie's able to save him before he's killed by the fish or drowns underwater. And then at the end of the movie, I mean, we see that he is alive, but is in a catatonic state. And Dr. Mingers claims that there is nothing to fear, but we then hear that indeed the piranha have gotten out to the ocean, because we hear the little trilling noises that we hear from them every time we see them, basically showing up at an oceanside beach. So that's 1978's Piranha, just like this fun little chase up and down this river. But let's talk about the three things I like about this movie. First and foremost, there's a really interesting tone to this movie. The tone of the movie is kind of wonky. It almost doesn't work. However, it somehow does, and it becomes a very lovable movie. This is billed as a horror comedy, and you can definitely see that because there are essentially three different movies happening in this one script. First, you have the buddy cop story, which is the Paul Grogan, Maggie McCown characters who are working together. They kind of come from opposite worlds. Paul is kind of this broken down mountain man who is struggling with being a single father, but also from the divorce that he had. He's a drunkard. She's overzealous about her job as a skip tracer. She's a little bit aloof, but they seemingly have sexual chemistry between them, but at the same time, they barely seem to kind of operate well together. So it kind of comes off as this kind of buddy cop comedy, where you have these people who are kind of an odd couple. Then you have the campground horror tale with Paul's daughter at the camp, and you know that there's this whole water race thing that the head of the camp, who's played by Paul Bartel, another guy who shows up in a lot of the Roger Corman movies, but you know that's happening. You know that he is forcing the kids to participate even if they don't want to. Paul's daughter is particularly scared of the water, as she should be, because there are going to be piranhas in there. But the Paul Bartel head counselor guy basically says, no, you have to participate. I won't allow you to not participate. He's kind of a dick about it. So there's that part, which is also very scary because you don't want these kids to get hurt. And then you have the third part, which is the resort part, where Dick Miller and the whole final part of the movie takes place. The climax of the movie takes place, in which case that comes across as the direct Jaws ripoff, where you have the Colonel Waxman, you have Dick Miller's character. They're downplaying the whole thing about the piranhas. They are wanting people to stay at the resort to take part in all of the fun stuff, while knowing that there is this possible problem in the water. So you have these three different movies, and one of the things is that, in that stuff with Paul Grogan, he is so typecast typecast, I guess is the right word, in the small town where everybody thinks he's this drunk, and every time he tries to get help for this very real thing, the cop or somebody else from town or whatever says, oh, you're the drunk, you shut up, drunk, go, stop drinking and stop, trying to cause problems or whatever. Meanwhile, Maggie is there the whole time, unable to help him get past what people in this town think he is. And that adds to some comedy, because every time that he tries to get help in the early parts of this movie, he's stonewalled by people saying that he is this drunk and a loser and all that. And it just kind of makes for this really kind of funny dynamic that keeps the plot moving, even though it's kind of a really stupid way to keep the plot moving, if that makes sense. Next up, and this kind of also plays to the tone a little bit more comedic tone. The fish attack scenes, I think, are both charming as hell and cheap as hell all at the same time. First and foremost, you see the school of piranha moving, and they are obviously like two-dimensional, like, I don't know if they're things on sticks, like paper on sticks, or if they're plastic or what they are, but you can tell that, they don't wiggle like fish do. They don't move like fish. They're being pulled along on a track. And it's so silly that you kind of giggle every time, but at the same time, it's like, hey, I know the fish are coming, or I know the fish are traveling. It's so effective, but so funny at the same time. Then when you get into the actual attacks, the trilling noises that the fish make, the blah, 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 it almost sounds like underwater turkeys attacking. It gets ridiculous, but at the same time, it's like, again, it's effective. They're there, and it's like, oh God, who's going to die now from the underwater turkey noises. And then you have just enough underwater attack stuff that you know what's going on but you can't really see anything, so you don't have to worry about the effects. The fish attacks are done so close up, and all you basically see is this flapping thing that is this fish, and you see sort of a body part that they're going after. And it's disorienting, but at the same time, it's, again, effective, because if you are in the water and you're being attacked by something under the water, you're not always going to be able to clearly see what it is, and your perspective is going to be too close to really understand what's going on, especially when you have these rabid fish that are just chomping through you like they cannot get enough to eat. It's silly, it's funny, but all at the same time, it works in that kind of cult classic type of campy way. And thirdly, finally, when Maggie and Paul go to the installation and they go inside where Dr. Hoke had been, and where he stays to basically keep watch over the piranha, they find all of these little fish monster things in jars and various fish tanks and stuff. And of course, all these things look like horrible Nazi experiments gone wrong, right? They're half piranha, half snakes. You see things that look like a human fetus in one of the jars. But what you also see are a couple of these little fish monsters that just kind of roam around, and they're fish with arms and legs and tails, and they look like half dinosaurs, half fish. Some of them look like, almost like if you blew them up to be gigantic or city size, they would fit right into a Godzilla movie. They are so adorable and so cute that they are, I just sat there and I immediately, when I saw them, I was like, oh my God, what is that? And then the next time I saw them, I was like, oh, that's so cute. It's one of those things, I was like, I just want one as a pet. It's kind of, it's silly, it's stupid, and they don't seem to be dangerous because they're out in the open. They don't attack people when they're walking around. And it's one of the most bizarre things in a movie that takes itself seriously without no attention being drawn to it. We just find out later that Hope was working on these super strains of these creatures, and okay, I guess that was one of the failed versions that turned out to be too nice or too cute for it to really work against the North Vietnamese, I guess. I don't know. Anyway, that wraps up this week's Monster Mondays. Don't forget to check out new episodes of Film Seizure every Wednesday and a new installment of Monster Mondays each Monday afternoon on filmseizure.com. You can also find both of those shows at places where podcasts are found, like SoundCloud, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, TuneIn, Spotify, Audible. Just search for us. I'm sure you'll find us someplace. And you can also hop on over to Facebook and Twitter to follow us by just searching for Film Seizure. And while you're at it, head over to my website, www.bmovieenema.com, and read new text reviews each and every Friday morning. You can also follow B Movie Enema on Facebook and Twitter. Just search for that. You'll find it. And while you're at it, go on over to YouTube and follow the B Movie Enema channel, where you can find episodes of my show, B Movie Enema the series, where I host a movie. 13 episodes were released as part of season number 1. Season number 2 is just around the corner, coming this September. So until next week, stay spooky.